Hey you guys, I wanted to pop in and say thank y'all so much for subscribing. We're at 500 subscribers. I'm so grateful to God for each one of you guys. And I do want to do a giveaway. So for the giveaway rules, you have to be a subscriber. And I want you to tell me your favorite thing about God and also your favorite verse, either of all time or just currently. So that is all you have to do. One of the winners will win either, like I was saying, the Chick-fil-A gift card or the Chipotle gift card. So that will be your gift. So food. The other person who will win the devotional, the journal, the writing, like the pens and stuff and the highlighters. So that will be what the other winner wins. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the family. I seriously appreciate y'all sticking around, liking, watching my videos, whatever. Like, I appreciate the support in whatever way you're supporting me. So please enter into the giveaway, and I will reveal who won, like the two winners of the giveaway, in the next video. So you have to stay tuned for that to see if you won. We'll see y'all when the giveaway is over. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jania, and today I don't really have a title for this video, but I did want to talk about how I did go through a season of depression while waiting on God to come through on a promise. In high school, my freshman and part of my sophomore year, I was not doing what I needed to do in school. I was not applying myself. I was in classes that were requiring me to give more, but I was giving minimal effort, thinking that I was just gonna pass with flying colors. Because when I was younger, school just kind of came easy to me. I didn't really have to work. I didn't have to do much. I just got good grades. So I went into high school with that mindset, and I don't know why I did, but I did. And I ended up messing up really badly. Once I got to the end of my sophomore year, I was like, man, I messed up really bad. So what did I have to do? I had to get myself in gear and try to figure out how I could raise my GPA, how I could start getting myself prepped for college. Junior and senior year, I went full force. I was studying more, I was applying myself more, and I also was taking some college credit classes. So I was like, oh my gosh, if this is good, I'm gonna end up making up for the lost time or the time that I had wasted essentially my first 2 years. Meanwhile, I'm trying to get it together. We have college reps coming into our schools, and I remember so vividly by senior year, I was like, I want to go to UNT. Like, that was my dream school in my mind. That was the only school that I was thinking about. My sister had went there, but then our school had taken us on a college visit to UNT, and that was the only school throughout all of the visits that I was like, oh my gosh, I really want to go to this school. So it just so happens that when they went to Texas State, I was like, I'm not going to that. Everybody would like ask me about that school, and I'm just like, no, I don't want to go there. It was never a second thought in my mind. I'm just like, no, I'm not going there. And I remember my mom saying, have you considered this school? Have you considered Texas State? And I'm like, no, not really. I don't want to go there. I don't really like it. But I remember it was 1 week in particular that a Texas State rep came to our school. And I kind of have my ears like turned halfway off because I already know I'm not interested in that school. So it's just like, why am I gonna sit here and be completely engaged when this is just not for me? The rep starts going through the PowerPoint. And how I remember this, I don't know. He starts going through the PowerPoint, and I'm like, okay. He gets to a slide, and it shows like the river in San Marcos. I don't know what that river is called. I probably should know because that's where I went. But I don't remember what it's called. But I remember when he went to that slide being like, oh my gosh, like the river is really nice. Mind you guys, I'm not an outdoors person. I was even less of an outdoors person at that time. So the fact that that is what stood out to me is just super crazy. So God can really use anything to pique your interest. And he gets to that slide, and I'm like, wow, that looks really cool. And then he says some other stuff, and I'm like, maybe Texas State is not that bad. And then I'm also like, not me liking what he's talking about. I put that out of my mind because I'm like, in my mind, I'm going to UNT. So that later, I realized, is a seed that God used to plant in me to change or redirect my course or reroute me to the school that he wanted me to go to. It gets to the end of senior year, and I was not able to pull my GPA up enough in time to be able to apply to these colleges that were honestly expecting you to come in with a certain GPA. And my GPA wasn't going to be competitive with the other people who were coming in. So I'm like, okay. In that moment, I realized like community college is gonna have to be the route that I took until I was able to transfer. When I tell you, I was so sad, I was so defeated, I was so devastated because I'm like, this was never my plan for my life, even though I had to acknowledge that I had put myself in that situation by not doing what I should have done the first 2 years. I just really like wholeheartedly believed that I was going to be able to pull it together in enough time to be able to go to a 4-year university just right off the bat. Time keeps going on, and then I'm finally at community college. And I just remember being like, God, this is not what I want for my life. So not only was I feeling that way before I got there, but when I got there too, I'm like, there has to be more to life than this. And I do want to say, if you're in community college, don't let anybody make you feel bad about going there. Don't let yourself make you feel bad about that. This is where I was, but I also was not looking completely at the situation from a mature perspective. I was kind of sulking a little bit. So it kind of caused me to miss some of the things that, could have been positive. So I feel a certain way, but never let anybody make you feel less than because you went to a community college. You are smart. There's purpose over your life. You're intelligent. All of those things. Don't talk down on yourself because you're at community college, because there is nothing wrong with it. I wish I had had that perspective then. It's time that I believe my first semester, my full year at community college passes, and I'm like, okay, God, now that I'm getting closer to transferring, I have a lot of credits completed. I'm like, where do you want me to go? I told you guys that I was holding firm to UNT being the school for me. I just knew that that's where I was going to go. But I was like, God, where do you want me to go? I knew even in that spot in my relationship with God, that if I'm asking God, that's going to be the best thing for my life, because I had clearly made a mess of what I thought was supposed to be a good plan. Literally right after I asked God where he wanted me to go to school, I started seeing Texas State stuff everywhere out of nowhere. In that point in my walk with God, I'm like, okay, I'm trying to build more of a relationship with God to where it's like not only just me knowing him as like Lord, but also as friend, like on a personal level. So I started seeing those signs everywhere, and I'm like, oh my gosh, God, you're speaking. Like, you speak to me. I was just hyped. So I was like, okay. And at that point, I didn't even care that he was saying that Texas State was a place, even though I was so gung-ho before not going there. I'm like, okay, this is what God is saying. I'm cool with it. And I think looking back on the situation, God having me start out in community college put me in a place of humility, only because I had not even grand thoughts, but I really thought I knew where I was supposed to be going. But I feel like him putting me in that place to be humbled and see that I couldn't get myself anywhere, I was more willing to accept what he had for me. And I was willing to accept where he wanted me to go without bickering, going back and forth with God, just saying like, yes, Lord, I'll go where you want me to go. So I'm like, okay, God has told me that Texas State is where I'm going to be going. And I've seen all these signs, and in my mind, I didn't necessarily think or really know at the time, like God can give you a promise, but that doesn't mean that when he gives you that promise, the promise is going to come to fruition a week after, a month after. You could be waiting months, you could be waiting years, like you just never know. And at the time, I didn't know that. I just knew that God was speaking to me, and I'm like, okay, well God has shown me this, so it's going to happen. I had no concept of time. I had no concept of God's timeline, which I never will have a concept of, because God's timeline works completely outside of ours. I just knew God had given me a promise, and I was gonna press towards that promise. So I'm trying my best to make sure to keep my GPA up, because I was like, the same thing that happened in high school is not gonna happen now. So I was doing fairly well, but I remembered it had to do something with I think the deadline to submit your application for Texas State and how many courses that I needed to complete. I knew it was going to be like a short window of time that I was going to have to pretty much make sure I got all my classes in and make sure that all of my grades were good. So it got to the point where I decided, like, let me try to test out of math, because I didn't really have the luxury of having a lot of time to take the course. Because I think when I took it the first time, the grade that I got, I didn't care for. So I wanted to take it over again. So I remember signing up to take that math course. Mind you guys, I am not good at math. So the fact that I was bold enough to be like, I'm gonna test out of this, you had to know that I was in a desperate situation. I take the test, and if my memory serves me correctly, I believe I failed. And not only did I fail that test, I was in Spanish at the time, and I think I had done poorly on a test. I think that's what it was. And I was just like, okay, God, let's be real. Mind you guys, I said that I was not even being honest about the sadness that I felt necessarily to God about not being able to just jump straight into a 4-year university. So I'm still carrying that on me. And then God has given me a promise. I'm pressing towards that promise, and I'm being met with opposition. after opposition after opposition. And I think I had gotten to the point where I just broke down and I'm like, God, I don't understand. I asked you where you wanted me to go. You told me where you wanted me to go. And now I'm meeting nothing but roadblocks. I do not understand how this is the way that you work, how this is the way that things work. I do still have a video on my channel. I think during that time period where I made a video talking about this specific situation, I was still in it and it was still fresh. So I didn't even really know how to communicate completely what God was doing because there were so many things that I didn't understand. But I will put a little clip of that video in here. So then as I started like hitting roadblocks, I was like, well, God, why would you allow me to see where I want to go and where I thought you wanted me to go if I can't get there in my own time? But in the midst of me, you know, making my own timeline for when I wanted all my plans to happen, I took my eyes off of asking God what he wanted for me rather than just telling God, okay, God, this is what I want. And not only that, but God had to wreck my plans, but he also had to break me down. God showed me quick that it's not just about actions. Where your heart is and where your mind is like really important. And I realized that my heart and my mind weren't in the right place. But I feel like it's important to put that in there because it just really shows, and I can look back and say, oh my gosh, I remember where I was at the time where I filmed that. But it was during that time that I fell into depression, and it was on account of several reasons, but mostly because I felt like God had given me a promise. I had been receptive to the promise. I tried my best and I was working towards it, but nothing was happening. Nothing was shifting. And I'm like, clearly I can't stay in the place that I'm in forever, God, but it literally feels like you gave me this promise and then you left me, like giving me no more instructions, no more anything. And I just felt so depressed. I felt like, what's the use of me even trying to try anymore? Like, what's the use of me trying if me trying is not going to get me to the place that you promised that I would be? It honestly felt like I was saying, like God had just left me. And that was enough for me with the place that I was already in to just be like, I don't care anymore. I would still go to class. I would still kind of, you know, like pretty much do what I needed to do. But I'm like, what is the point? If you told me this and what I'm looking at looks like the complete opposite of what you told me, it felt like God was kind of like maybe like dangling a carrot in front of my face too, only to take it back. And now I know that's not who God is. But I just could not see past my disappointment. And that disappointment led me to being depressed because I'm like, if I can't get that, like, what does it matter about anything else? So that was a really, really tough, dark period of my life. That was really the first time that I was learning to, like I was saying, like truly become rooted in who Christ was. And I'm like, this is the first time I've ever asked you for anything like this. You tell me and then you leave me and everything is going wrong. So it's kind of like, why would you give me this in the first place? So I was kind of spiraling and I felt like I just didn't care about very much. I wasn't even showing up in the relationships that I had with people, my friendships, my relationships with my family, how I typically did. I was literally a shell of the person I was. I wasn't really communicating very much. And it's just because I felt hopeless. And then also I stopped caring about how I looked. So it was just kind of like I had a whatever attitude about life. During that time, I had moments where I talked to God and I was just so frustrated. And I felt, like I was saying, so hopeless and kind of a little bit empty too. And I remember at that time going through the feelings and thoughts of depression and not really wanting to do anything and not really caring about a lot of things, that the enemy had a field day in my mind. So I was already in a very bad, very bad position. And it just gave the enemy a foothold in my mind. And it was just, the thoughts that I had at that time were absolutely terrible. The thoughts, I feel like, of me already feeling hopeless, that just gave, like I was saying, the enemy more ground to plant whatever negative thoughts he could in my mind. Whatever thoughts that were contrary to God's will and God's way is what he was putting in my mind. the thoughts had gotten so bad to a point that I'm like, God, am I even still saved at this point? Like, the things that are going through my mind, the way that I feel, the way that I'm doubting you, like, this is all grounds for you to just be like, I'm done with you. Like, I don't know what other way to say this, but kind of like off the hell you go is really how I felt. And I was just like, well, dang, if salvation is not even an option for me, like, what really, like, it was just so bad. And this may sound a little dramatic, and there are things, because this did happen a while back, that I can't remember. But if you've been in a place where you just felt completely hopeless because of whatever happening to you, then I feel like you kind of will understand where I'm coming from. And it's a very tough, difficult spot to be in. And that is when the enemy likes to swoop in. When you're already down, he comes in and just tries to do whatever he can to wreak more havoc. I remember salvation was something that I just kept thinking about. And I'm like, I felt like I had lost it. If I'm being quite honest with you, I felt like I had lost my salvation. And I remember at that time, we had like a family Bible study. I don't remember what book exactly we were in, but I remember, like I was telling you guys, still having those feelings of all of this stuff is going on. And I'm trying to still go through the motions of life, hoping that God will speak to me or hoping that something will change. And I remember my dad was reading, and I think he was reading the verse that says, like, nothing can separate you from the love of God, neither height nor depth, nor angels, nor demons. Like, all of those things, it talks about how you cannot be separated from the love of God. And I remember when he read that, and this kind of makes me like a little emotional. When he read that, I remember saying, like, what if I have done something so bad that is like, God is not going to forgive me for it. I remember him saying, like, kind of just like reiterating that verse, like, nothing that you can do can separate you from the love of God, and that salvation is given to you through Jesus and not through anything that you have done. You just accept the gift that Jesus gives you, and you choose to, walk in the ways of God. I remember being so just wrecked by that. And I'm like, if God can still love me, and I was in a spot where he should have wanted nothing to do with me, then I don't understand it, but I have to accept that love and be grateful that he's given that to me, and he's given me salvation through Jesus. After he said that, I feel like that kind of, God used that to like bring me out of that state of depression and of hopelessness and feeling like nothing was ever going to change. Because if Jesus still loved me and was willing to die for me and give me eternal life, despite all of the things that I've done, like, I knew that I had to accept that gift and be grateful for the gift that he had given me. And I think that gave me a new perspective on salvation, because I knew, like, growing up, they would say, like, you can't earn your way to God. Like, salvation is a free gift that you have to accept, and you can only be saved through accepting Jesus. But knowing that I was in the worst place that I had ever been in my life, and him still saying that I love you and I still died for you, and you've already accepted me, all you have to do is continue to walk with me, I was just like mind blown. And I feel like that is what pulled me out of being depressed. It wasn't an encouraging word somebody said, it was literally God's word that pulled me out of depression. So I was just so grateful to know that I hadn't messed up too much, that the grace of God still couldn't come down and reach me, because I was in a pretty deep pit. But the grace of God literally came down and met me in my pit and brought me back out. And the wild thing is, I remember always having a strong dislike for speaking in front of people. That's not my thing. It's still not my thing. I don't really prefer it. So as I was coming out of that depression that a lot of people really didn't even know about, I didn't talk to people about it, so they didn't know. I remember at the time, our youth pastor asked, could I give my testimony at church? Granted, he didn't know anything that I was going through. Nobody really did, besides like my family. So it just so happened that I was coming out of that state of depression and waiting on the promise of God to come to pass in my life. And I was like, God, not you having me share a testimony. Because mind you, it had been months and months and months and months and months and months and months. And I had never been in that rotation. So I was just chilling. I was like, ooh, I won't have to go. Every time I didn't have to go, I was excited. So it was finally my time to go. And I was just like, God, you really do use everything. Because it was at that time that I was coming out of the state of depression. And I did essentially have a testimony to share. So after, I forgot to mention this part to you guys. So after I just accepted that Jesus still died for me and Jesus still loved me, and that was enough for me to keep living life, I ended up applying to Texas State. And I remember, I don't know, I was just really anxious. I don't remember how all that stuff ended up working out. So with my Spanish course, I think I ended up just doing better on the rest of the assignments or test or both. And then with the math thing, I cannot remember. I'm sorry. It's been at least 6 years. I either took the test over again and passed the second time, or took another math class and got a better grade than I initially did the first time. Don't remember which one it was, but everything worked. God worked it out. So I ended up applying to Texas State, and I remember just being anxious, waiting to hear back on whether I got in or not. And I'm like, ooh, I guess I did get like the college experience, because you know when you wait to get your application back, it's probably like you're on pins and needles. So I had that experience, and I remember I was in the car with my family, and I got an email, and I was kind of like bracing myself just in case, even though I had faith enough again at that point to believe like God told me I'm going here, this is where I'm going. I was still nervous. So I opened it up, and it says that I was accepted. And I just remember being so grateful and so happy, because I'm like, God, you really said I'm going here. Now I'm going here. That happened before it was time for me to share my testimony at church. So we get to church on Sunday when I have to share my testimony. So I got up there, and I'm thinking, this is an emotional story, but I'm like, I'm not gonna sit up there and cry. Like, I barely even like talking in front of people. I start this testimony off, and I start crying. I start crying. And you know, in like older Baptist churches, when you get up there to do something for God, and either like you're nervous, so you start crying, you're filled with the Spirit, you start crying, and whatever way you start crying or you show any emotion, people are like, that's okay, baby, like keep going. I started telling the testimony, and then like I'm telling you guys now, started crying. It was really when I got to the part of Jesus and salvation and him dying for me that I started crying, because I knew that I was in a bad place, and I knew I didn't deserve the mercy of God. I did not deserve the grace of God, but through Jesus, he gave me that. So I started crying. I really do remember people saying like, that's okay, like keep going. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm really crying. And I couldn't stop crying. But I ended up finishing the testimony, and I remember when I got to the point of saying like I had gotten the results back, and I had received the what is that letter called? I had received the acceptance letter to get into Texas State, that people in church, like, they were clapping. And I was just like, wow, God, you used not only the lowest point in time in my life to bring me back to you, you also used me to share a testimony. And I told you that I did not like talking in front of people. Anytime I could not talk in front of people and get out of it, I would. But God used that very thing to be the thing that I ended up sharing with the whole church. And I was just like, I don't really know what I'm going to say to a group of adults, because I was maybe 19 at the time. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to say to a group of adults, but all I can really do is share what God has done in my life. I do want to encourage you guys, if you are going through feelings of depression, you feel like it's a season of depression, and you are just holding firm onto the promise that God has made you, and it seems like nothing is working, nothing is coming to pass, God would not and will not give you a promise and not come through on it. That just, it's not in his nature to lie. It's not in his nature to fail. What he says has to be true, because he is truth. So even when it seems like that thing is so slow, because when I was waiting, it felt like an eternity. It felt like the days were stretched out. So I totally get when it seems like it's really not happening. But if God has said something to you, if he's spoken it to you, it's coming to pass. Like it's no other option, even when it seems like the exact opposite. Now looking at it, it's about perspective. While you wait, are you filling your mind with the thoughts of God? Are you diving into his word? Are you spending time in prayer? And if you need to spend more time in those things because you feel like, God, you gave me this, and I don't have much to cling on to, I don't have much to hold on to besides the word you've given me, that's time for you to be like at the feet of Jesus, quite honestly, to be spending more time with him. Because the less time you're spending with him, and your situation seems like it's not changing, your situation seems like it's honestly maybe even regressing or going backwards from what God promised you, you have to stay connected to him. Because when you don't, that's when the situation I went through, your mind starts taking over. The enemy can start to plant things in your mind. And that's just like such a terrible combination when you can go to the one who gave you the promise. Because if he gave it to you, you can trust the heart, or trust his heart behind. You can just trust his heart, period. Because God is not going to give you a promise and it's not going to benefit you and your life, and it's not going to enrich you. Like his word literally says, I know the plans that I have for you. They're plans to prosper you and to give you a hope in the future and to bring you to an expected end. It's not to make you feel depressed. It's not to make you feel sad. It's not to make you feel weary. We do have to wait on those things, and waiting on God is very tough. And I'm still figuring out. Looking back on that period of my life, I was waiting on school, but it's a million other things now. But it's choosing to say, God, I've seen you come through for me before. I saw how I responded last time when I was kind of waiting, but I got weary, or I wasn't waiting with a sense of like expectation, or I just started to look at my circumstances more than I started to look at not even the promise, but the person behind the promise. Because the promise is great, and I was so happy to be at Texas State. But when I got the promise, that did not mean that the promise was perfect. There were a lot of things I went through even there that were not my favorite thing, but it did not negate the fact of the God who was behind the promise. And it was a blessing to me, and it was a blessing to my life. But I think it's just also holding on to the fact that God, I'm so grateful for this promise. I'm so grateful, more importantly, that you're speaking to me, but it's you. It's not really the promise. Like I was saying, if you're going through a spout of depression, like I so get it. It's very, very, very difficult. And I think it looks so different for everybody. So I can't say that I know exactly what you're going through, but I know what that felt like for me. And it was not fun. It was not a place that I would wish on anybody. But literally, the grace of God can reach you even there. Even in your lowest pit, even in your deepest pit, even in things you got yourself in, the grace of God can reach down and save you. Even in the times where you don't ask God for a promise and he gives you something, you're like, well, you gave this to me and now you just seem to have left me. Literally, I don't understand it. I can't fully articulate it, but it's knowing that even in those moments that God never does leave us. He's always there with us. He may not continue to give you words or continue to speak on that thing every single day or every single week. He may give you something one week and you have to hold on to what he gave you. And even more than that, hold on to, like I was saying, knowing God's character, because he's not going to tell you something and just leave you to dry. Like he's going to come through, but it's all in his timing. And I think that's the hardest thing about getting a promise, receiving a promise, and then also waiting on a promise of God is trusting his timeline, because we have our own timelines for school. I would have preferred things to have went much faster, but I do think the lessons that I learned in between built up maturity in me naturally, but also spiritually. I was able to grow that muscle of being patient, that muscle of waiting on God, that muscle of being honest with God when it feels like he's abandoned me. And I do want to say a prayer for anyone who is struggling with depression. God, we come to you lifting up every one of your children right now who are struggling with depression, who are in a state of hopelessness, who are in a state of feeling like they just want to give up. God, I pray that in this moment, you would touch them, you would speak to that thing, and that beyond the promise, beyond anything that you can do for them, God, that they would trust your character, that they would trust your heart, and they would trust that you know what's best for them. The plans that you have for them are good. God, I pray that they would not lack trust in you, but would have trust in you even when their circumstances are not great, even when their circumstances seem opposite of what you promised, God. I pray that they would wait on you. I pray that they would be patient. I pray that you would give them a piece of joy and a sense of rest in their waiting, God. I pray that you will restore the brokenness, broken hearts, feeling like you abandoned them, God. I pray that you would show them to be the God who you are, the God of truth, the God of love, the God of peace, the God of clarity, the God of direction. And I just pray that their hope in you, God, would be restored. I pray that they can receive the promise with open hands and an open heart and a grateful heart for all that you've done, God. We thank you. We love you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you guys so much for watching. I just speak blessings and peace over you guys. And I pray that the love of Jesus would, what do they say? Rest, rule, and abide in your hearts. Thank y'all so much for watching. I will see y'all in the next one. Bye.